This is going to be a video on how to remove the injector assembly, take it apart completely and clean it. I've got the head of my Imperial. Wait, still waiting for new sleeve to be done. You can see there's the piston there, the conrod. The bearings and the here don't actually look that bad compared to the big end. The valves here, there's a lot of crap up against the cylinder head from it not running properly. The valve seats are actually in remarkably good condition. If this is going to focus, there we go. That's the inside where you can see the explosion cup is and the little holes in it here. And this is the injector assembly focus on the top here. Now I'm going to start stripping it down and I'm going to talk you through step by step what you have to do. If your head's still on the engine, the first thing you're going to want to do is loosen, this has been broken here since I've had it, is loosen this side of the double offset lever, disconnect it here from the fuel linkages, remove these two bolts here. These are only, well, they were only hand tight. Pull this shaft off completely so it's out of the way, and then we can start on the next step. Right, now that you've got that side of the double offset lever off, the next you're going to want to do is gently loosen the nut here. That's the packing gland nut. You just want to take that not far enough so that it'll come off, just enough so that it's free to move and it won't damage the packing gland inside. Once you get that loose, apologise for the shaky camera. Next, this is only brass, so you want to be very gentle and start undoing this here until you can get it finger tight. This is the top half of the injector. Once you remove this, then we can undo the casting from the head. Remove that like that. That's the top half of the injection assembly. Then we put this somewhere safe. Next thing you're going to want to do is undo this bolt here and this bolt here on the other side. Now the reason I haven't taken the second part of the double offset lever assembly off is because ordinarily the block would be here and you couldn't get down to undo these two bolts here because they're about that long and they hit up against the head, up against the cooling hopper. So this bit, unfortunately, unless you have your head off, has to stay on. Next, we want to start loosening these off. There's one. Now very gently on the other side. That's why you had to take off the injection assembly, so you can get your shifter through, or your spanner, whatever you're using. Excuse me. Now, you've got to lift that slightly to get the last of the threads out. Now, if your injection housing here is stuck in the head, do not pry between here. Excuse me for a second. Sorry about that, I didn't want to cough and sputter on camera. Do not, as I was saying, do not pry between here. What will happen is this is the bottom part of the injector. The injection cup can get stuck on the seat down there. If you pry this up here, I'm talking about this from experience now, you can snap the bottom part of the bronze bushing, fingers flaring, that's on the other side of this cup, and it'll break the bottom half of the injector. Now, this is not an original explosion cup. When I bought this engine, that was missing. So me and Dad machined this up ourselves. On yours, you'll most likely have a screw. It's flaring on the camera again. You'll most likely have a screw in here. It'll be a little grub screw. Now, you want to unscrew that and keep it safe. Then your injection cup will pull off. This is pressed on and I'm going to have to put it in the vise to pull it out. Now, before I pull it out, I would also like to point out you can now remove the internal needle. Now, the sleeve on mine is loose because me and Dad had to machine it. But yours, I don't know if it'll be as loose as the one that mine is. Makes no difference really. It's just there to hold the needle as a guide. So on mine, all I have to do is tip it out. Grab the spring. Put that there. Now this is the internal needle. That's what meters the fuel as it goes into the explosion cup. It sits in the spring like that, and then on its seat. Now if your engine's blowing air back into the fuel, or you can't get any out of it, I've got to turn the light off so it won't flare. Is it going to focus? Come on. No, it's not going to focus. But there's a seat. Oh, that's better. On that. There's a valve seat on that. If that's got dirt, or it's not seating properly, or if it's rusted, that will not allow the engine to run. If you've got bubbles going up into your fuel tank, chances are that that seat has been damaged. Excuse me for a second. The best thing you can do is take this out with some valve grinding paste and get down in there. I'll show you how to do it once I've taken the explosion cup off. But that's the fuel metering needle, and you can see the grey marks of the seat because I've only just had this redone. Now, we've removed the explosion cup from the bottom of the housing, as mine doesn't have that screw. It's just pressed on mine. You can see here where the housings had to be bronzed back together. That was because when we got it, that bottom part had snapped off because somebody had tried to lever the injector out of the block, and because the explosion cup was stuck, it broke off. That's what you have to be very, very careful of. That's very soft. Now, in here, if I haven't tipped it out already, turn the flat light off. Come on. Turn that back on. You can just see in there, there's the valve, needle guide. Now I'm going to see if I can get that to come out so you can see it. Right, there is the internal valve guide. Now yours will look different. This was made up completely off the top of our head because we didn't have drawings of the inside of the injector at the time. That book that I sent to, I think it's Rotary Hose, it took 6 months for us to get that book. And this is what we've got, the fuel. This sits on top of the explosion cup here. The needle sits in it like that. And that needle comes out the bottom here and seats on the top like that. And then the fuel in the chamber goes down that groove. See if it'll focus there. And then when the needle lifts, it allows into the seat. So you'll have something similar to that setup, but you'll definitely have the needle. That's how these injectors work. Now this here is the explosion cup. Now this is rather an ingenious injector assembly. They run on almost any fuel except petrol. Anything that can be compression, ignition fired, it'll run on it. It might just be a little bit hard to start when it's really cold. But you'll have the 3 little holes here at the bottom of the explosion cup. On the top, it's going to flare on the camera. That's where the needle seats, and that's the seat that you have to use some valve grinding paste. Put a little bit on the tip of the needle. Put the guide back in its place. Now you don't need the spring on the needle, you put your valve grinding paste on there. I've got dirt on it now. On there. You put that down in through the guide. It's very hard doing this one-handed. Put that back through the guide, into its seat. The guide will hold it steady like that. And very gently, I generally do it like this, or I get somebody else to hold the focus. The guide, you want to grind it like an ordinary valve until you get... No, it's not going to focus. It tries, but it doesn't. That's better. until you get a nice groove, or not so much groove, as a grey ring that shows you've got a nice seat on the other side here too. Now the way these injectors work is when that double offset lever here, when that lifts, when that plunger lifts, it allows the needle, because there's a spring between here, to lift up off that seat. It allows a little bit of fuel. These engines run on hardly any fuel, that's why they only have a small tank. It lifts up, allows a really little bit of fuel to go down into the explosion cup, into the bottom half of the injector. Now as the piston comes up on the compression stroke, focus, as the piston comes up on the compression stroke, the fuel inside, there's a chamber in here, the fuel inside there detonates, and as it does that, it comes blasting out these three holes in an atomized vapor form, and that's where it completes the rest of the combustion inside the combustion chamber. And then the engine just keeps going and going and going. Now these, if they're not set spot on, pretty much, they can be, or mine is, but that's probably because there was so much piston slap it was not funny, they can be a real mongrel to get to run really, really nicely. You can get them to pop over, but to get it to run the sweet as a nut, they take a lot of fiddling around, especially if you had to homemade your injector. The rest of the assembly just looks like this. As I said, be careful you don't break this part of the assembly off. You can see where we've had to bronze it back together. It's pretty much just a tube. And there's tops of the threads. Be very careful you don't damage them. And I think it was Rotary Hose also asked, yes, you will have to make up a bunch of little rubber gaskets to go on the water holes here, 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 and I think there's one here to cool the injection passage. That's the pre-ignition chamber where the injector sits in there, and that's pretty much it with these engines. They're rather simple. The ignition timing is controlled purely with the compression. There's some shims in the back of the engine on the big end. If you put more of them in, you get higher compression. It'll detonate faster. The valves, they haven't got the original springs because they were missing and Dad turned new ones on the lathe. And that's pretty much it with these engines. There's not overly much to them. And another thing, there has to be some sort of soft metal sealing ring in there. But yours should still have that in, as your injector was there. When I got mine, it was missing. And the head gasket on this, it's just a, I think it was stainless steel, or it's steel. It's just a soft metal ring that goes in the groove here and compresses up against the block. Stay focused. Apologise about the focus, it's the phone's having a bit of a nana. Once you get these engines running, they're really, really nice to listen to. Like when, there's other videos on my channel, but when we first had it running, because it had a couple of stuck rings, there was no piston slap and it had decent compression. It would run really, really, really nice. But now, as everything's worn in, because I never took the piston out when we rebuilt it the first time, which was a big mistake. But that's pretty much it with these injectors. I'm going to clean these up, and I'm going to show you how to put it back together properly. I'm going to have to upload part 2 of this video and call it injector reassembly, because I can't upload really big files all at once. For some reason, our internet connection won't let us. Right, now it's time for reassembly. Now the most important thing that I can recommend with these injectors is to take a photo of every single part that you take off, so you know how it goes back together. Because as I said, this injector isn't 100% like the originals, because we did manufacture 90% of the internals. This we didn't have. The only parts that came with it when we got the engine was this here, with this broken off, and this. The spring we found, the needle and the explosion cup, we all turned on the machines here and here. So the first thing we do is we clean everything meticulously. You want to make sure you can get all the foreign focus. You can get all the foreign matter out, otherwise the injector won't seal. And then you'll get fuel back into your tank, or air back into your tank, blowing fuel everywhere, and that makes a mess. That's another reason why I think that elbow is on your engine. I think it's rotary hose. Occasionally the needle won't seat properly and you'll get a blast of compression back up through the fuel system. Now I think that elbow on top of the fuel pipe was so that when it did that, instead of it blasting up from the bottom of the fuel tank, shooting a jet of liquid everywhere, it would just vent back into the top of the tank. Because it does this on my engine, and it makes a mess. And I can show you a photo of the concrete on the side of the shed wall when it happened last. So the first thing we do is clean everything. Generally I use a rag and the good old blue tin of stuff. Now, because I've just pre-cleaned everything here, the first thing we do is we begin with the bottom of the injector housing. We put, stop flaring, focus, this here back in. I'm just going to give this another quick clean and I'll show you how you put it in.